Stay tuned for Bobby Moore Speaks. To order any of the books, CDs, or videos offered, you may contact us at bobbymoorespeaks@gmail.com. Our purpose is the search for truth, and we invite you to join us in this noble quest. Any errors of material fact will be corrected if brought to our attention. This is the Bobby Moore Communications Network. Freedom of speech. Use it or lose it. And greetings, friends around the world, throughout the universe, whenever and wherever you may be. This is Bobby D. Moore. You know, the world is not all bad, in spite of the terrible news we hear every day. In this edition of Bobby Moore Speaks, I want to talk to you about some of the good things that have happened to me in my life. Now, sure, there's been a lot of sadness and frustration, but along with it, there have been unexpected moments of joy that have appeared like golden daffodils on an otherwise barren landscape. Let me tell you about some of them. Let me tell you about some of the unexpected kindnesses that have been showered upon me. Often by total strangers who had absolutely no expectation of reward. I'll make no attempt to list them chronologically. I'll give them to you freely as they float to the surface of my mind. There was a time when I was younger that I was deeply in love. More in love than I can describe. More in love than you can imagine. The object of my affection was a young woman who was the product of a broken home, as was I. We had made the long trip all across Texas to Mexico with the hope of being married there, but for reasons which would form the basis of a whole new story, our plans fell through. We soon found ourselves in a border town with scarcely enough gasoline to return home. We had no money for a room. The sleep we managed was on a blanket on the grass beside the road. But on the way back, we stopped at a beach on the Gulf of Mexico and made a picnic of what was left of the food we had brought with us. It was a warm summer day, and as we bobbed like corks in the blue-green surf, our cares momentarily faded. But all too soon, we were out of the water and felt the sting of biting flies and blowing sand, and the salt water began to dry on our skin and in our hair, and the prospect of driving the hundreds of miles back home in that condition wasn't a pleasant one. A man who had been camped nearby had begun to load his fishing gear in preparation to leave. The shadows were now lengthening. Evening was on its way. Our momentary happiness was now approaching despair, and we said nothing. Then, as the unnamed man began to take down his tent, he stopped. Abruptly, just like that, he stopped. He walked over to us, introduced himself, and asked if we would like to have his tent. He gave us his tent, no strings attached. Incredible, but absolutely true. He showed us a source of fresh water nearby and drove away. I have never seen him since, nor do I even remember his name. We spent what could have been our wedding night on a fresh blanket in the cozy tent with the door zipped up, free from sand and biting flies and mosquitoes. The kindness of this stranger on the shore will be remembered as long as I live. Many times I've wondered what prompted him to do what he did. Perhaps he remembered a time when he was young and in love, and seeing the two of us in that setting struck a responsive chord. Maybe he was intimately aware of the discomfort of sand and salt water and no place to sleep. I don't know, but I do know what happened. Listen to me, folks. There is still goodness in this world. Sometimes it seems hidden under all the wickedness and evil and deception that surrounds us. But believe me, the light of it still shines through. People sometimes ask me why I always seem to be on a crusade of one kind or another. Well, I can tell you why. It is because I know, deep down in my soul, that there remains a spark of goodness in mankind. I know that we are potentially noble and godlike creatures, and I want to see that spark of goodness fanned into a burning flame. How can I explain the countless times that total strangers have come to my aid? I can't. It's that simple. I can't. The other night, shortly after midnight, I ran out of gasoline. Happens to me all the time. With the cost of gasoline being what it is, I can't put very much in at a time. My gas gauge doesn't work, and sometimes I run out. This was one of those times. So I found myself with an empty gas can, walking down a deserted road, headed for a gas station 4 miles away. I hadn't gone far when a pickup truck stopped. Inside was a young man and a little boy who was his child. The father offered me a ride to the station, but of course I accepted. During the course of our short trip together, I learned that the fellow was a volunteer fireman and that he was on his way to pick up his wife at a local hospital. He left me at the station with an apology for not being able to take me back to my truck. Why, heck, that wasn't necessary. I was just happy to get to the gas station before it closed. I paid for my overpriced gasoline and turned to leave when a young, hefty Mexican man asked me if I wanted a ride. Do you think I said no? Now, this fellow also had a child in his vehicle with him. It happened to be his daughter, who was about the same age as the son of the fireman who had given me the ride earlier. How interesting. During the course of our short trip back to my truck, the young man introduced himself and his little daughter, and I soon learned that he worked as a janitor at a nearby high school where I had taught some years before. He had recently come from Mexico, where he had worked for a drug cartel. That's what I said, a drug cartel. He seemed very articulate and was very responsive when I asked him about his former career. He didn't mince words. He spent the next half hour describing to me what life was like working for the cartel. More importantly, he gave me a glimpse into his mind. I thanked him for the ride, and he waited while I poured the 3 gallons of gasoline into my truck. He even held the flashlight so that I could see. What a night, I thought, as I drove away. What a contrast between the two men. One, a local fireman, probably a member of a local church, with all the other accoutrements of stability, and the other, formerly a professional criminal. Both of them very human, both of them with young children whom they obviously loved, and both of them linked with a kind of strange human bond which induced them to offer kindness to me, a total stranger, without expecting any tangible reward whatever. Another case. Some years ago, back when I still had faith in the American dream, I regularly bought used machinery of one kind or another, expecting to utilize it in the great manufacturing enterprise which I had been building over a period of many years. On this particular occasion, I had made the 100-mile trip to Dallas to buy a load of used heavy metalworking equipment. My big trailer was filled with arc welders and metal cutting saws and lots of other tools and machines that I needed to help make my dream a reality. I was a happy young man as I began the return trip, but loading had taken longer than expected, and it was getting late. The approaching darkness was hastened by an enormous black cloud which quickly moved in from the west, and by the time I had made my way through the traffic to the outer loop, it had begun to rain. Slowly at first, then in torrents. The darkness by now was total. The lights of traffic were blurred through the rain, and I was beginning to feel a little uneasy, when suddenly, without warning, the lights on my truck went completely out, and it stalled. There I was, in the middle of heavy traffic, in a torrential rainstorm, in the dark. I was scared, and there was nowhere to go. Cars and trucks went screaming by. Did I say I was scared? I found a flashlight in the dark and stepped outside the truck in the rain to try to determine what had gone wrong. I knew that my chances of being hit increased exponentially with each second. An eternity of time seemed to pass when I realized that a dark figure stood beside me in the rain. It was the figure of a man I had never before seen. He had placed himself and his truck in jeopardy by stopping, lights on, immediately behind me, protecting me to some degree at least from the traffic. Somehow, something I did caused my lights to come back on, and wet and shivering, I was able to start and begin to move with the traffic. I never knew who the man was, never saw him before, and I haven't seen him since, but he may well have saved my life on that cold and rainy night. What was his motive? What did he stand to gain? Nothing. What did he stand to lose? His life. Upon reflection, I can bring to mind several times when unknown strangers have appeared out of nowhere to protect me or to assist me in what could have been life or death situations. Why do I owe my life to these strangers, these shadowy figures never seen before or since? I have always held in contempt the idea of guardian angels, the idea that a person might be somehow protected by unseen forces. It seems grossly unfair, doesn't it, when you consider the thousands upon thousands of innocents who have fatal accidents or otherwise die every year. Where was their guardian angel? Where was the guardian angel of the little child who was run over by a careless driver? Where were the protectors of the countless ones killed in air raids or burned alive by napalm? Where? It would be the ultimate display of hubris to express the thought that somehow my worthless life had enough value to be protected by forces beyond my scope and comprehension. Nonsense. But at the same time, I am forced to admit this: the seemingly random events of this life, which we are inclined to call coincidences, are not always what they seem. In fact, I'm almost to the point of believing that there is no such thing as coincidence. But regardless of the causes behind these acts of kindness, whether they be random events or in some cases are directed by an unseen force, I am grateful. My friends, there is still goodness in people, and I thank God for it. And I tell you, one act of kindness, one candle, can dispel a room full of darkness. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to have a personal word with you, if I may. Several listeners have asked me how we manage to keep our internet radio and television stations on the air. Their assumption is that it must cost a lot of money to do what we do. After all, both the radio and television webcasts are worldwide in their scope. I'm amazed every time I check our coverage to realize that the broadcasts reach places like Germany, France, Great Britain, Hungary, South America, Africa, Russia, and just about any other place on earth that you can name. I'm impressed by it. And the thing which makes it all possible, of course, is the internet. As this is being recorded, I do not have the financial support of any outside organization. Neither do I receive support from the government in the form of Social Security checks or welfare checks. I do not receive any retirement benefits, and neither am I independently wealthy. I receive no wages or salary for the time I spend writing and producing these broadcasts. And yet, amazingly, we reach a worldwide audience. At the end of each broadcast, we offer the free CD entitled Does God Exist?, which tells an amazing story of my personal encounter with this mysterious and incredibly powerful force we call God. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you again for being with us, and we invite you once again to write for your free copy of the hour-long CD entitled Does God Exist? This is a story unlike anything you have ever heard before, and it can be yours absolutely free of charge. All you have to do is ask for it. Just send an email to BobbyMooreSpeaks@gmail.com. That's all the address you need. BobbyMooreSpeaks@gmail.com. Just tell us where to send it, and your copy of Does God Exist will be sent to you as quickly as possible and as long as supplies last, absolutely free of charge. And so, until next time, this is Bobby D. Moore saying, goodbye, friends.